Hello, everybody. We are on 7.5 Theories of Development. This is actually also going to be split into two different videos. So for this, we're about halfway through. We're going to be looking at different theories of economic and social development. So for this particular video, we're just focusing on one. We're going to start with Rostow and his stages of economic growth. This is also called the modernization model. Then we're going to move into Wallerstein's world system theory, which includes the core periphery model, which should be pretty familiar to you guys at this point, and then dependency theory, and then finally the Brandt line or the north-south divide. These are all these guys here. We're starting off with Rostow for today. So in terms of Rostow's stages of economic growth, this is also called the modernization model. So this is what we're going to be using in order to understand what he's encompassing within his model. So here we have level of development increasing, and then also time moving forward this direction. He asks these questions. How do countries become economic development? Is there a formula for economic growth that could be applied to less developed countries? And this was used or based off of development in the US and Western Europe. So countries that have already gone through this process through industrializing. These are the different stages. So we're going to go through each one of these together. All right, so the first stage, traditional society, as you can see, earlier in time and lower on development. These are different ways we can measure this, right? Political power, local or regional, and this used to be based on ownership of land. Trade was local. The setting was rural. Culture was family-based. The labor market had subsistence farming, and pretty much primary sector and informal. Technology was low, little science during this time period, and then wealth, little and little ability to move up. So think of medieval Europe, right? We don't have this in existence anymore, but this is like the first stage of this model. Then preconditions to take off. So as we move forward and development is continuing to happen, we see leadership investing in the country. We see small scale international trade. Urbanization is just starting up. We have a shift to secondary. So think of like early industrialization, like mechanization of work, processing within factories, right? Technology is beginning to develop, and we see that within transportation systems and in mechanization. Wealth is increasing, and some examples would be Nigeria, Afghanistan. So this is not just across the board. We're going to get into some of the criticism soon, but just for the sake of an example, some of these would apply to these countries here. Then takeoff. So countries are developing more, right? Major export industry and increased international trade. We're seeing urbanization take hold, like that's the norm. The labor market is fully industrialized and has a high output. So we see this widespread. Far more advanced technology. Businesses are making money, and we see shift to patterns of consumption. So as opposed to just like creating things, people are consuming things, buying things. Some examples would be newly industrialized countries like the Philippines, India, Vietnam would be considered some examples. Then the drive to maturity. Population, we see less of it, like growth is declining. The labor market. So we have specialization of industry, workers become skilled, and we have more widespread education. So we see that shift. High levels of power consumption, improved transportation and communication technologies. Investment in social infrastructure. So think of schools, hospitals, daycares, like elements that make your life more socially developed. Examples would be Brazil, Russia, China. And then finally, high mass consumption. So population continues to decline or even go into the negative. For the labor market, we have tertiary sector being the most dominant sector, highly skilled and highly educated workforce. Again, high levels of technology. For wealth, people start to spend on luxury goods. And continue to consume. Examples would be Japan, North Korea, Eastern Europe, US, Canada, so on. So if you come back to these here, this is one thing that we can also kind of connect back to Unit 2. with those models of growth, right? So moving on to some of the criticisms. So this is a theory, right? This is one model. Some of the criticisms include that this was based on industrialized capitalist democratic countries. That is not the only type of country that exists, right? It falsely assumes that all countries value these ideals. Other cultures value kinship and community as far more important than wealth and status, right? So this is not the only way to live or only measure of development. Also scale and uneven development. If we come back to this idea of scales of analysis, if you zoom in or zoom out, we're going to see different stats and numbers. So growth is not uniform across one country, right? We have India, right? So as a whole, that's stage 3 or 4, but in some of the more rural, less developed areas of that country, it would be stage 2. So again, this is not something that you can even apply across the board for every country. Some more criticisms: linear progress. It goes through a line in a defined order, but some things could impact that, right? Wars, corruption, natural disasters, that can also affect a country's development, right? To put it at a standstill or even regress. It doesn't take that into account. Also, globalization. So this focuses on development from a single country, despite the fact that we're all connected, right? We live in a globalized world. So transnational corporations can impact countries differently. And then equal potential to develop. This is also taking into, or making assumptions here, right? It does not take into account that there are major differences between countries that just have to do with their geography, right? Landforms, climate, resources, all sorts of things. So if we think about site and situation, right? A site influences a situation of a country. Sustainability. So this does not take into account massive consumption and what that means for our environment, what that means for resources, what that means for pollution and waste. And then finally, the legacy of colonialism. So Rostow did not consider the massive impact of colonialism on less developed countries. So some of those longer term effects and what that might mean for their later development. So that is it for this one. We will go over the last 2 in our next video.